What's going on, 3DMJers? Welcome back to another episode of the 3DMJ podcast. This is Eric Helms, your Chief Science Officer. I'll say part-time coach because I pale in comparison in terms of my experience to these two amazing gentlemen we have on. I'm joined by Alberto Nunez, Jeff Alberts, my brothers from another mother, my own personal coaches, along with the whole coaching crew, because I'm just a big diva and I need a whole pit crew to help me get to the stage. But today we're not going to be just talking about getting to the stage. We're going to be talking about what we do with our athletes to recap, evaluate, and review a contest season in the rearview mirror to see what we can improve upon in the future. So, Jeff, I want to start with you. I know that you are someone who I respect tremendously because you're always about reflection and improving, and not just on the outcome, but also the process. So what does your process look like when you work with an athlete, they're at the end of their contest prep season, and you want to do a review and a recap? Do you have a basic structure to how you like to do that typically with your competitors?
I prefer to have a video call, a face-to-face with an athlete. So it gives us, more of a personal connection, personal reflection on how everything went. So it's basically diving in for a good hour or so and talking about, how the show went, how they feel about their placing, how they feel like they, stood next to everybody else, if they felt like they're in a good place, how the process went for them, if they were happy with the result or not. Things that not only the athlete can improve on, but, maybe something myself as a coach, whether it's communication or peak week or, just, every week that goes through that we're going through, if there's anything that maybe I can improve on. And usually that conversation, it starts to take many shapes and forms, different routes. And I think also, I've been doing this for a long time, so I know if we're talking, maybe a week after a show or the same week or a couple weeks after that, there's going to be a lot of emotions that are running high. Obviously if you did really well, you won a show or you got a great placing, you're going to be riding the high. And, sometimes people are just like immediately on to the next thing, like, oh, let's do it again, doing it right away. And there's other people who maybe didn't do as great as they were hoping. And, then you have to, in a sense, show some compassion towards what they went through. And it's easy to tell somebody, hey, you did great, you'll do much better next time. But when you're, I've done shows where, I didn't get the results wanted, and it just takes time to process. So I think just that conversation of allowing some time to actually process things and just to have them understand that clarity around what they just went through, it's going to take time, and it's going to, like, perspectives will shift as well. So what you might feel now might change a week from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now even. So it's just kind of it's a conversation that ends up kind of taking, different shapes and forms. But I'm sure we're going to go over some of those conversations here. But that's, in a sense, the first step is just having that conversation.
Yep. Being available for them live, giving them an opportunity to vent, process, and also letting them know that this initial way you're feeling after the show is going to change. And I think that's an especially important thing to remember now in the age of social media. In my experience, a lot of people make the mistake of using social media to vent. And I think that is a commonplace thing. Like, hey, it's just Instagram, it's just Twitter, it's just X, whatever we want to call it. You can just throw up a few sentences, let people know what's up. And it even encourages you now. Like on Instagram, there's the quick little thought bubble you can put up, or you can do a story. It'll disappear and you can just be like, didn't get the placing I wanted. You know who did though? The athlete who I saw had one of the judges as, I think, their coach. I'm not sure, but pretty sure. Bias. You post that up, you find later that's actually not their coach. It was a split decision. You look at the pictures with a little fresh mindset and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that put that up there. So one of the things that I always find is a tough thing to walk that fine balance is I do want to touch base with that athlete quickly. And I typically plan ahead of the show, like, hey, let's plan on X day, Monday or Tuesday after the show. Let's touch base. And I would advise you, don't do a show recap until you've had a few days, maybe even after we get to talk about it. It's something I actually suggest to people, especially if they're super active, if they're fitfluencer, influencer types, and especially if I know where their head's at mentally in the middle of contest prep and they're a little more erratic than normal. I try to help them see that in themselves and then encourage them to talk to me. And the balance that I find hard to strike is giving them a space to vent, but also not completely buying into whatever narrative they have. So it's a balance
100%.
between,
Yeah.
yeah, like you have to be compassionate, but you also, like, if they feel like they got robbed, they need to be able to express that. And if I don't agree that they got robbed, or if they have some perspective on, or maybe they think they did a lot worse than they did. Like, that's another one. You'll either get the, I'm really unhappy with my placing. These are the most common ones. Or, man, I don't know, I looked filmy, or I was spilled over, or I didn't like my look, or whatever. I saw this cell phone picture, or, I didn't like the way I looked backstage in a mirror, and it was, probably terrible lighting or whatever. And you kind of just have to let them express that, feel it, and not tell them their experience is wrong or that it's incorrect, but also not big up it or put too much emphasis on it, because I think we as coaches have to remember just how much our input means. So I find that call is a really critical one that I think you have to be kind of on your P's and Q's with emotional intelligence for to get right. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about how you guys handle some of those contentious and strong, difficult, mixed emotions that your athletes have when you touch base with them post show.
I think the hardest version of this for me is when we have a show with a lot of athletes and some are going to do well, better than they expected even, and then others not so well. So you're kind of, as a coach, you're like, like you said, you're trying to center them a little bit, right? Because it's like, hey, get high, enjoy your moment, but also you're, around this guy that, he was close, and he might not appreciate you, like, I guess, being too loud and obnoxious about your win. So that's draining. Like, that reminds me of like Mayhems, as much fun as they were. Like, there was a bunch of different hats you have to wear that day. Same thing with Worlds, right? And you also don't want to show favoritism, like, among your athletes. It's like, yeah, you want to party hard with like this athlete that just did really well, but at the same time, take into consideration the fact that, this person right here, as of right now, they feel like the last few months, they're not going to feel this way forever, but they were a complete waste, because it didn't work out the way they wanted it to. So, yeah, that part is difficult. The human emotion aspect of it. It's probably, I think, not just when it comes to prep, but just altogether in the game of bodybuilding, is probably one of the most overlooked skills that a coach can have, is learning to help an athlete work through those things. Because, like you said, dude, sometimes they make us do some really dumb things and we didn't mean to.
Jeff, how about you?
I feel like same with Berto. Like, your Worlds is tough because I think I had 5 or 6 or 7 athletes there, and there was some favorable placings, favorable results, and then there was some lower placings. And in the moment is tough because you can sit there and say someone who's closer towards last place, and you can say, hey, this is Worlds, this is the best of the best. You had to qualify to get here. So yeah, I mean, if you get there, regardless if you're first or last, like, you're some of the elite bodybuilders on the planet there. But still, when you place where you don't want to, it doesn't make it feel any better. So it's a tough conversation to have. And I think for me anyways, I just find it better just to listen, like you said, or just kind of just listen, allow them to kind of feel what they're feeling. And then in the moment, I try to offer something positive, not like, hey man, if we would, bring up your muscle size or whatever, you'd place better. It's like, okay, kind of what I just said, like, this is the world level. You're on this stage, and there's over 8 billion people on the planet, and you're one of them right now on this stage. So that's an impressive feat. But I try to just listen and then find something positive and the things that we need to work on. I mean, that's a discussion that should be coming a little bit later down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough thing as a coach. And actually, I would say it's even a harder thing as an athlete, which we all have both perspectives on, to have a relatively realistic understanding of what you're capable of, but still, as a coach, having enthusiastic drive to really push the person and have an open-minded optimism about what they can achieve. And then as an athlete, to have an idea of what you think your kind of chassis is capable of, if you will, but also having that same kind of optimism and not just like, it might go well, but literally having that translate into the kind of drive you need to make very high level progress. Because I think there is some cognitive dissonance there. And in my mind, a huge part of it is, what are your values and why are you competing? And the athletes I struggle with, or I should say, the athletes who I think struggle the most are probably the most competitive athletes who aren't necessarily the most competitive, So that's a rough combination. Someone who maybe they were an amazing badminton player and they got into bodybuilding and they have, let's say, badminton genetics, right? They're not necessarily going to be perfectly built for the sport, but they have that athletic drive. And if they don't necessarily know how to stay in that competitive mindset when they're not actually competitive, that can be a challenge. Because if they don't feel like they're fighting for something realistically, then sometimes they don't know how to fight. So one of the things I try to work on with my athletes well in advance of kind of the season recap.
I was going to say before,
yes,
going backwards a little bit, usually conversations from the get-go are talking about expectations and what's realistic. And because we are coaches that have been in the game for a very long time, we have a good idea as far as what is actually realistic for each specific individual, depending on their physical characteristics, but also the mental and emotional characteristics. There's a big part in that too. So it's just, in a sense, having that conversation from the get-go, this is what I expect us to do. And if I fall short on those expectations, then that conversation that we're talking about at the end, that's going to be a really hard conversation to have if you've dropped the 8 ball from that initial conversation as far as those expectations.
You're totally right. And I feel like you can identify the athlete who's going to struggle the most on the front end, based upon their language. And one of the things I do, this also comes back to asking questions, like you said, Jeff. When I first talk to them about expectations and their goals, when someone is really focused on winning and the competitive outcome, and you start to talk about things about the process or the journey, they're often going to go, yeah, that's all fine and good. And they may even pay some good lip service to it, but they might say something like, well, if I'm going to compete, I want to do well. And that's something I care about. And that's fine. But it's difficult to sometimes get them to acknowledge when they've improved or done well for themselves, regardless of the field. And the strategy that I have found most successful is to still speak in the language of winning, but from a very pragmatic perspective. What is you as an athlete, what can you do to make yourself most likely to win? And that's not to give up your power. And the way I describe that to the athlete is that if your motivation levels, your and the decisions we make are heavily emotionally based, whether we like it or not. We have to accept that as humans. So that if you don't get to have the emotional control so you can make level-headed decisions, because your emotional state is going to be entirely dependent upon who shows up and how good that judging panel is and what they saw that day, the lighting on stage, where you got placed, what your competitor number was. So are you sitting off in the wings so they never think you get a good enough look to get moved to the center? We see these things happen in the sport all the time. You happen to be the last person to check in. You're number 109 out of a bunch of other people who are, a lower number. You're off in the corner. You might have placed better, but there was poor lighting. You're more conditioning heavy. You're not quite as full. different stage, different place, different time. You show up to the venue 20 minutes earlier, you move up 3 placings. That can happen at a high level. And we've seen it. So I try to explain to the athlete that if your emotional state is dependent upon those things, which you can't control, you're a worse athlete. You're setting yourself up to not be able to have the best likelihood to win. Because what you want to be able to do is evaluate, like we're talking about here, how you did and what you could have done differently, rather than just find yourself blowing in the wind emotionally based upon these things that you don't have control over. So it's okay to want to win, but you also have to acknowledge that you're going to hate to lose, and you have to be able to deal with the emotional fallout of when you do, quote unquote, lose, by however you define that, and not lose your agency so you can do something better. So I don't know how I try to explain that to athletes, like, hey, you can want to win, but you have to be emotionally ready to want to win so that when things don't go well, you can turn that into the right type of drive instead of just letting it demotivate you or turn you into someone who is jaded or cynical about the process because you're trying to deflect rather than actually embrace the fact that things didn't go the way you wanted. Berto, how do you have those conversations? That's something you've talked to me about a lot of, you kind of have to, like, oh, you said this many times, true dogs are those who know their own limits because then they can actually push to them and try to expand them. And I think that's not just your quote unquote grind ability, but also your competitiveness. Because if you are a dog, that typically means you're interested in winning. You want to beat people. You're finding a way to go head to head. And that means you're going to set yourself up to be in a position where more often than not, you get a favorable competitive outcome. That also means that, but to do that means you have to know your limits of what you are likely to be able to achieve.
Yeah, it's like loading up a bar appropriately, right? It's like, you know that you're willing to work hard, but maybe you can't squat 400 today. And it'd be dumb to load it up to 400 if the most you've ever done was 315 for a triple. So having that sort of awareness, like you're not afraid of, facing that at some point when you're ready, but you're just not ready for that. And I think that's the hard part for bodybuilders is that I remember, powerlifting is a great example of this. Like people just kind of know if they're like local level of, maybe they should take a crack at nationals because it's very clear. You just look at the data, look at the list, see about where you're at. And I know a lot of powerlifters that they're perfectly happy just kind of staying here at the local level and just, expanding their abilities like within that specific platform. I think that's a great thing. I think people, if anything, they get too much flack for that. Whereas I think sometimes I wish bodybuilders were a little bit more aware in that way, where I've seen it a bunch of times, especially with people on the NPC side. They're like, I'm going to go to nationals because I nationally qualified. And I'm like, bro, you qualified in Colorado. Like there's 6 million people here. Like that's it. Like you're going to spend a lot of money and not have a very good time because you're going to feel out of place. And sometimes, yeah, like that beats them up and they're like, you know what, like forget this sport. It's rigged. It's this, it's that. And it's like, dude, you're missing out like on all the really good things that this sport can be giving you. Something I like to point out to my athletes is like we go through the process is just bring up the segments that are part of your little personal highlight film, right? Like you never thought you could bench 2 plates at this body fat at this weight. And like, look at you now. Like don't lose sight of that. You've never seen this sort of definition in this area. Like please acknowledge, like you don't need anyone there to tell you just how pumped you are. You saw that, you snapped a picture of it, you send it to me because boy, were you really proud of that. So you almost need to give yourself like these little trophies like along the way. Like we got so caught up in one of your moments, like first thing that came to mind, Eric, as I said that last bit is we uploaded your penis online once on accident because you had feathering in your quad that we were so pumped up and we completely lost sight of the penis. And it was on the bodybuilding.com message board forums, which it was, thank God, I don't think anyone saved it, but it was there for like 5 minutes and then we're like, waiting for hits, waiting for our boys online to be like, look, he's got these striations, and we took it off on time. But we were so like pumped about like that moment, and especially your first prep, like that is probably the most exciting part is, as you're chewing away at that fat, just like all these little landmarks and new places you've never like been to, and all these new little challenges you face, and how you were able to overcome whatever it might be, the family barbecue, that big test you had. There's all these little awards that are out there for you to acknowledge, that at the end, that's really, I think, the meat and potatoes of like what the sport can actually hand out to you. So yeah, I try to make them, if anything, like, yes, we're aware of the things we need to work on, but especially on the way down, like, don't forget how good you felt, how good bodybuilding made you feel when this popped up, when that popped up, when you overcame this, when you overcame that. Because all it takes is, a bad day, wrong lineup, all those other factors you named, and people just throw that out. Like you need to be, yes, your biggest like critic, and you need to push yourself, but at the same time, yeah, you need to give yourself your props about the way. Otherwise, you're just waiting on that day. Like, what a volatile sport to try to approach in that manner.
That was me in
So
2002. I was like
yeah,
fixated on a pro card. It was pro card or bust. There was no, like, that's how I deemed success. And in a sense, like you said, Eric, it's like you're kind of giving up power because it's a subjective sport for one. So now it's like you're putting all this energy, focus into a specific goal, which is, it's good because you could move yourself forward. You got, chasing something down. But if you're putting 100% stock into just that as what's successful or not, so my case was, basically a whole off season dedicated to improvements for a pro card. And then back then I was a shorter prep for me, but 14 weeks, I didn't cheat once on anything. Like, I was so locked in. And I remember at the end of a day, just being, crushing my training, crushing my cardio, like on point with diet. And I would think like, okay, I'm not doing enough. Like, I could be doing more. Never satisfied the entire way through. It was, now looking back on it, was kind of miserable. Like, now that I think about it, that whole process. I get to the show, long story short, I lose by 1 point. I'm devastated. Everybody, and it's just to add fuel to the fire. I had everybody after the show coming up to me. You should have won. You should have won. I even had a judge or two tell me I should have won. So again, like that conversation when you're in the heat of the moment, those emotions, probably not the right time to have a conversation about what the outcome was. So basically it was a long plane ride home, and in a sense, like some depression there because I didn't achieve what I set out to do. It almost felt like I did it all for nothing. And I remember like going out to lunch with my dad saying, this sport's dumb. Like, why am I putting all this effort into this just to get second? And it took me a long while to get out of that and to start to get more clarity. Like I said, like the further removed you get from it, you start changing perspectives. And I realized like, okay, I was putting all my stock and giving all my power to basically 7 people to tell me if I was worthy or not. And what I didn't see is that was the best physique I ever put on stage at that point. Like you said, Berto, like I didn't see anything positive through the whole prep. I didn't notice like, hey, I'm actually getting conditioned. This is the most condition I've ever been in. I'm actually shredded. I could see shredded glutes. I've never seen this before in my life. And it's like, I kind of just ignored all that and didn't give myself enough credit. So it was kind of a eye-opening experience, but it took a long while for me to start to shift perspectives and to evolve my mindset and to start noticing there's other things that are successful outside of just getting a first place or getting a pro card. Like in a sense, I'm worth more than just that. So it took
Jeff,
a while.
The only downside or the only upside to you not noticing that you had reached your best condition and kind of rewarding that is you didn't accidentally post a poorly cropped picture that had a little bit of your genitalia online.
But
So, not all bad.
I wasn't on the internet in 2002 either. Now I could go back to 1995, like pre-internet, and I remember this is the Mr. Fremont. Like this is for me the Mr. Olympia, and getting second place there, and walking off stage and verbally, I'm so embarrassed now. I hate telling this story. Verbally saying I got robbed, backstage, verbally expressing that. And then of course, you got your friends or whatever. So yeah, bro, you're robbed. So it's like it's feeding the ego even more. And, I'd say a couple years went by looking at the photos. I'm like, yeah, I got my ass handed to me. Guy one was like 30 pounds bigger than me. But in a sense, you can be, I guess, a little too confident as well. Like, if you don't know what the expectation, like realistic expectations, thought I was better than I really was. I'm the guy that's like on point with diet. I'm training harder than everybody else, right? So I'm outworking everybody, so I deserve to win. That was the mentality. So it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I really liked how you were talking about there, Jeff, of the competitive drive actually helped you in some ways be locked in. You did everything perfect nutritionally. You didn't cheat on your diet. But then all of that felt unrewarded once you did not get the outcome you wanted. And I think there is somewhat of a lesson to be found there that if you can tap into a healthy competitive drive, then it can really be a good thing, because you can be motivated not to cheat on your diet, to train as hard as possible, and to do as much as you possibly can, to leave no stone unturned, because like you said, everything is riding on the win. If you don't get it, there's so much risk. There's a part of you that you may not have been able to realize until now in reflection that was really afraid of the idea of losing. So fuck, I'm not going to cheat on my diet. I'm not going to not do everything I possibly can, because I need to win. Because if I don't win, you know what? No, that's not going to happen, And then when the win didn't come, big emotional fallout. So I think in many ways, it's the job of a coach to help athletes who want that win so bad, but don't necessarily have the foundation underneath it to prevent that fallout. The way I see it is that there's a big difference between striving for excellence versus fearing what will happen if you fall short of it. But they can look really similar. And in both cases, you can see someone who really wants to win really bad. And I think you have to earn the right to strive to be competitive. And what I mean by that is not developing an amazing physique, not getting shredded. It's, do you have the emotional stability and the layered levels of differential motivation and values to say, yeah, my primary concern is being the best version of me, knowing that I can look back on my prep, feel really good about it, or whatever the process-oriented goals or the intrinsic motivation of competing are, but then also be hungry and want to win. Because it's totally fine to not place as well as you want and be frustrated and angry, but you're really doing yourself a disservice if that's all you feel, especially when you can look back and go, no, I kicked ass. Like, this is my best season. I just wasn't better than as many people as I wanted to be, So
I think it's important to have more than just one why.
Yes.
Like, you ask yourself, why do I want to do this? What's really driving me? Because if it's just the one thing, like winning for me, and like I say, you can spiral down if you don't get what you want. So if I fast forward to 2023, I had a bunch of whys. So I was able to, like, my ultimate competitive goal was to place a top 3 at Worlds. I didn't get it. I walked off stage. I was disappointed, but that disappointment lasted literally maybe 2 minutes tops, 3 minutes maybe, because the other whys started to take over. One of my whys was being able to get on stage and have my son see me, because now he's a little older. I'm like, he gets what I'm doing. I want him to see dad up on that stage. So mission accomplished. I wanted to do my posing routine. That was another goal. So my family and everybody else can see me do a posing routine. Mission accomplished. I wanted to be able to get on stage at 52 and say I can still hang with the young guys. Mission accomplished. Like, there was a lot of different whys that was fueling me, and not all those whys were fueling me all at the same time. It was phased. It was in phases. Like, some days, some weeks, it might have been like, I'm trying to get top 3. It's fueling me. Other weeks, like, okay, my son's watching me. That's fueling me. So, and I didn't know all this while it's happening. It's just more in reflection now. So it's important that you're spending some time allowing yourself to process, not just a day after a show or a week after a show, but allowing yourself plenty of time to reflect and process and reflect and process, because that helps you to navigate moving ahead. The next time you do this, you just have that much more clarity.
And those whys are what I use to form what I talk to the athlete in reflection. Like if we can clearly articulate the values and the whys behind why you want to compete, now we have a point by point thing that sometimes becomes a reminder, because one why maybe takes more precedence in their mind. You know, they might talk a good game. I'm all about the journey. I just want to be the best version of myself. And then they're like, what the coach? Like these guys, how did I lose to this dude? You know, I mean, and you can hear it in their voice. They start framing a really successful season as a loss because they didn't place the way they wanted. Now you can go, hey, I remember when we talked back when we first got your application and you were telling me why and what would make you happy. So what do you think about those aspects of your prep? And they either have to face the fact that perhaps the whys they wish they had were dominated by some things that weren't, at least when they talk, the primary whys, or it just serves as a really good reminder and it can pull them out of that. So it's kind of a win-win. They get to either become more self-aware and work on something that, making their emotions and their actions match their values that they state they have, or you can kind of take them out of a downward spiral that is not really accurately representing the whole of them. And they're just kind of stuck in one aspect of it. So I think that's a really, really well said way of doing it, Jeff.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez hopping in to remind you about a completely free video course in the 3DMJ Vault called the Pro Bodybuilder Case Study. It's probably the closest, most detailed look at a full-blown contest prep cycle that you've ever seen or been able to follow in one centralized location. One of our 4 head coaches, Brad Loomis, will guide you through an entire 3-year stretch between competitive bodybuilding seasons with one of his longtime athletes and professional bodybuilders, Phil de Guzman. We are so grateful that Phil let us use him as a subject because he and Brad kept phenomenal records, both in their spreadsheets and visually with his progress photos, so that we could track his physique and body weight throughout the whole process. You'll get to follow his career from when he won his first PNBA Pro card in 2020, through his initial recovery phase, through his first cut to make weight for a powerlifting meet, through his second and more robust off-season gaining phase, through his initial prep positioning diet and preseason holding pattern, and finally through his final contest prep fat loss phase where he won his second WNBF Pro card in 2023. It's really such a unique perspective on not only what a time investment it takes to see the results of natural bodybuilding efforts, but also to see how we coach on a macro scale. In this case study course, which again is totally free, you'll get a sense of why we tell our future competitors they can't simply contact us just a few months before they want to get on stage and expect the best results possible. You'll see how Phil and Brad made their long-term timeline and how the big picture considerations allowed for the improvements they were looking for over a few years' time. This is also one of the big reasons that we've recently changed our coaching options and offerings here at 3D Muscle Journey. We know the value of getting athletes ready early and how it impacts their results down the line. So we created some more entry-level onboarding methods to set more people up for success like Phil's in the future. So this kind of leaves me with 2 pitches here. First off, like I've already said a bunch, go take the Pro Bodybuilder Case Study course. It's for free at 3dmjvault.com, and you'll get all the videos and be able to download Brad's presentation with all of Phil's plans and photos and everything you need to kind of see how this whole coaching machine works over time. And secondly, if you've ever thought of working with us for any goals in the distant future, we think that you should reconsider that and possibly get on the squad now to see how you and your coach can make the most impact together for the long haul. Now, of course, we offer competition coaching with weekly check-ins during the season and occasionally more touch points leading up to specific show dates. But now we also have some great onboarding options for non-competitors as well. There are some lower frequency bi-weekly check-in options and even some training only or nutrition only coaching selections for those who just need help with specific parts of their athlete journey. You can always find links for coaching details on our main website at 3dmusclejourney.com. And additionally, we've got those coaching details directly linked throughout Brad and Phil's course as well, in case you get inspired to sign up while watching the videos in real time. So go ahead and head on over to 3dmjvault.com and check out the Pro Bodybuilder case study today. That's 3dmjvault.com to get instant access. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
Alberto, is that something that you leverage, is trying to understand the person's whys and then feed them back to them? Or do you take a different approach?
I think most everyone who's in their right mind eventually has a wide collection of whys. You know, they just don't realize it. Like, I think for us, a big one, like here's an example. We didn't start bodybuilding to be healthy. That was not high on the list. You know, health just kind of came as a default of being young when we started. But now as we get older, it's like, oh, wow, I'm so glad that I'm doing this. And I don't know, maybe I'm not doing like, professional bowling or fishing. I'm not saying that you can't be healthy and do that, but like, it's a byproduct of everything bodybuilding requires: the eating, the training, the self-care, all those things. So you try to pull out certain things that might not be super obvious to them when they're starting, because I think all our goals are pretty one-dimensional when we start. You know, I think across the board here, we all had one primary reason for doing the thing we were doing. And then competitive bodybuilding comes around, and it's like, okay, now we get to superfuse that one why into like this main objective here. And it's very easy to lose sight of all the other ways that this is already enhancing your life or can potentially be enhancing your life as well. So that's the main thing I try to drive home. It's like, hey, ever since you started bodybuilding, like, tell me, kid, like you've been better in school, haven't you? Like, especially your science classes. Like now you like math a little bit more now that you know what you want to do, and it involves lifting. So there's so many things to extract that are positive from bodybuilding. I've said this before, that I know sometimes parents get a little worried when their kid is out in college. I live in a college town, so I see it a lot, and they're like, man, he's too deep into bodybuilding. And I'm like, no. Like, if he does this right, it's going to be really good for him, because it's going to teach him order. He's not going to be partying like the other kids. It's a real positive hobby with some potential with some big upsides if they go about it right. So I think that's just the main thing with the new folks. It's like they know their one why, their main reason, the thing that got them involved, and quite often it's not the best reason. You know, could have been this: they've dealt with body image their whole life, or it was getting out of their first real big breakup or something like that. Like usually the first why should not be your one stop, and then when you add competition to it, that becomes like too much of the why. Whereas I think the most successful athletes are the ones that, yes, that's important, but they understand that what gets in the way of them maximizing themselves is just the things they're prone to doing in their everyday life. Like for me, what gets in the way of my bodybuilding is like Bert's committing Berts, and like my Berts are they're different from like what you're prone to doing, Eric, or what you're prone to doing, Jeff. But we all have our tendencies, and bodybuilding is an amazing playground, like to kind of try to exercise that out of you essentially. So the people who are really good at this, it's like they focus on that bit first. And those are the people who don't seem to plateau nearly as much. Like, what would Brian Whitaker do after every competitive season? He takes some time to chill, and then we knew it. We're going to get like these pictures from him, and he just wants to know, what can I improve on? And it's like, for us, Eric especially, Eric, we were younger, not nearly as established competitively, still has one of the most stout resumes, but he wants to know what we have to say. So yeah, I think that's the big one, is the having other whys outside of the main objective. I think that is like your proxies to whether or not you're being attentive to the right things. but like you can't have straight up tunnel vision. Like I don't even think about placings when I compete. I think about taking care of my business, the errors and the things that I have come to realize I made, say, like last prep. It's like, all right, let me try to minimize those things. Let's not make those things an issue, and go from there and just try to absorb and learn as much as possible. But the competition is so out of your control. Like if people realize how, I think for one, how genetic it is, like every class has a breed standard, right? And let's just say you're in the middleweight bodybuilding, it's like it's mastiff. The English mastiff is like the ick. I don't care. Like you could be a Dalmatian. We dye your hair. We do all these. You're still a freaking Dalmatian, dude. Like it's so preset. Like what success looks like at the top levels. And a lot of people see this as discouraging, but to me, no, it's kind of liberating. Now you have, like you hinted at earlier, you have a new proxy for like what is success based off your capabilities. Not only is this much more fair, but it's fair on both ends, actually. It's fair for the people who are not as genetically gifted, or sometimes like we see people who are so genetically gifted, they're just that mastiff that it doesn't matter what they do. And like to us as like fans, we're like, we've never gotten to see you maximize you because damn it, everything works on you. So, yeah, this is something that the guys that actually do maximize themselves. And it doesn't always mean they have the most out resume like Brian Whitaker. These are the folks that like literally like everything they're prone to, all the errors they're prone to committing. Like 10 years later, they're just not committing those errors anymore because they've been busy taking notes and applying. Like that to me is like the ultimate bodybuilders. My favorite bodybuilders like usually are those guys.
Yeah, I think this is a great transition to talk about the athletes who they don't necessarily need their coach to help them with the emotional. I mean, they will absolutely utilize their coach and they'll talk to their coach and they're part of the support network. But they either have the I would say the emotional maturity or the experience, so that they've developed the emotional maturity, so that they know they're going to have fields. They're not going to let them be anything more than the fields. And the story they tell about the outcome of the season is one that will help them. That to me, whether the person actually has that actual pro card in their wallet or not, is what defines a professional in the sport of bodybuilding. Is, do you craft stories and interpretations, and do you shift your perspective in a way that helps you? Do you take ownership of all the things that you can so that it empowers you rather than demotivating you to move forward? And I can tell you that is the thing that I think marks the goal. And that's what I try to help all my athletes move towards, is let's focus on figuring out what are the stones that you don't have left to turn over. And then we're going to systematically and relentlessly approach trying to turn over as many as they can at this time, and you knowing what you can do and can't do at right now and what's reasonable. And if it's something you can't do, we don't dwell on it. If it's something you can do, we emphasize it. And then the thing on a day-to-day basis, which is motivating, is getting as many of those things right. So there's wins to be had every day. And it's not just that win that comes at the end. And I think directing that energy is one of the main roles of a coach, and helping that athlete go, right, I have a mission and I'm going to turn over all these stones in the service of that mission, but they're not, but the mission's there. Like I'll use myself as an example, placing higher at Worlds, doing my first proper pro season. But I tell you what I think about every day is, did I hit my step count? Did I hit my sleep goal? Are my meals on point? Am I gaining weight at the right rate? And then when I'm in the gym, whether it's 1 or 2 times each day, am I putting every ounce of effort I can into each one of my sets? I look at the video because I record my sets. And did I do everything I could in my power? And that is incredibly motivating to me. I live for that. And I think that is a purposeful calibration that I've done over time. And I think that is what we want to do with our athletes. And one of the things that really helped me do that was getting feedback from all of you guys post-season. So when you're working with some of your pro athletes and they don't have a season that went exactly the way they wanted, but they have the emotional maturity to use that in a positive way. I would love to hear from you guys because, Berto, as an example, Dirk, amazing athlete, didn't take top honors at Worlds this year. He had a couple first place and a couple second places in I think the 3 or 4 pro shows he did. Jeff, you've worked with a ton of very high level competitors as well. Many of them pros or top level amateurs. When you have these athletes who don't necessarily need you to help them process their emotions to the same degree, what does that look like when you can be a little more focused on the actual competitive outcome? How do you guys process that? Are there body parts you focus on? Are there, conditioning, peaking? I'm sure it depends, but I'd love to hear you guys look at what does it look like more from kind of like the sport perspective?
I think it's important that we're looking at how we're assessing that in as far as like perspective. Are we assessing that based off of judges' feedback? Or are we assessing that based off of the athletes that were on stage with you at that particular show or Worlds or whatever the case may be? Are we basing that off of my experience, the athlete's experience, what they want to work on? So I take all that into consideration because I don't think we want to just say, hey, this one particular judge said you need to work on your back. Because you can go to a different lineup next week. You might have the best back up there, and then not one person is going to tell you need to work on your back. So that's the question I guess I ask you guys as well is like, how do you guys, I guess, deem like how to kind of gauge this or who to like base it off of? Because I use a little of everything, but it all comes kind of down to I utilize my experiences in a sense. Because like my thing with bodybuilding is, and I've been saying this a lot on Instagram lately, it's skill, it's art, and it's science, not in any particular order. I have a lot of experience. I've been in the game for a very long time. I have a good eye for the art. And of course, I know a little bit of science. So I do rely on, I guess, my own subjective feedback to kind of help athletes move forward on what they need to work on. And I know you guys done this for me as well. Like, hey, you need to get more conditioned or whatever. Because I think you guys are basing more on like what my art looks like in comparison to itself. And I think we also want to look at how did this athlete look a year ago, maybe if they competed once before or 3 shows prior or whatever. So that's the whole feedback loop, in my opinion, right there.
Yeah, I'll jump in first because I think I can be quick on how I do this. First,
You're probably going to say it in 10 seconds. It takes me like 3 minutes.
Well, you did that for me earlier. You were like, you should probably have multiple whys. And I was like, yeah, it's a pretty concise way of delivering that same message that I talked around for 10 minutes. So I'll see if I can do the same thing for you. I help them contextualize their placing based upon the field first. I'm like, yo, look, you were up against X, Y, and Z. And here are their strengths. And here's how that turns some of your strengths into okays and makes your weaknesses more apparent. So that's why you were in X place. And when you're in a lineup with that type of group and the lighting is like this is probably what's going to happen, So I think that type of understanding is kind of like, yo, that's not stuff that we have a ton of agency on. Here's how we contextualize and process your placing. And maybe in the future, what we would do is, not try to bring you in razor dialed, erring on the side of slightly flat if we have that same venue again where the lighting isn't great and it's better just to be a little bit fuller and a little bit spilly because everyone's going to look a little bit spilly and you're going up against these giants and you're a conditioning guy. That's an example. So then we put that away because I don't think that is super empowering. I don't think that tells us what pathway we walk with our athlete. But I'm basically almost always focused on how does your physique compare relative to itself in terms of size, conditioning, proportions, and then knowing our training history together, what you've done, what movements seem to be really hard to progress, what body parts seem really stubborn. Where do I think we can improve you and what matters the most? Because I'm trying to make you look on your own like a more complete bodybuilder. We've said this, you hear this all the time, like any top level competitor, enhanced or natural, they look like Mr. Olympia or the equivalent, world champion on their own, right? When you just see pictures, they're like, damn. And I think the goal is to get each person to that. Because for pros who don't look like that on their own, they're probably mid-level pros, you know? And when you get a whole bunch of people who look amazing on their own, and then you put them next to each other, that's when someone's got to place 10th, you know? So that's kind of why I don't emphasize that too much. But our goal is to get to the point where you can look back as a 75-year-old grandfather at a picture of yourself at the peak of your career and have your family be like, oh my God. And you'd be like, yeah, that was me, you know? And not look at it and be like, God damn, I never brought my lats up type of deal. So that's kind of my perspective is how can we improve your overall physique? And okay, cool. Let's figure out why we didn't place the way we wanted. But that a lot of that stuff is we'll figure that out on a Friday when you weigh in. But everything else that we're going to spend the next year and a half on is going to be based upon how do we make you a better version of yourself compared to yourself. I don't know, Berto, if you take the same tact.
Well, I guess to start, just because they're a pro or they're high level on the surface, doesn't always mean the insides match. Like you see this across actually all major sports. Like sometimes the best pure athletes, they're not very good at the game. They don't meet their potential because in a more dynamic way, they're not very good at picking up at the feedback that the environment's giving them. And to put it simply, they just run the wrong play over and over, right? Bodybuilding, where it to a large extent is what, like, how do your genetics respond to a specific stress? Like, it's just so wild how far some people can take it. I worked with an athlete, this was many years ago, who, geez, one of the most like well-muscled individuals I've ever seen. And I had to keep picking apart like little things that they were doing off that I'm like, I can't believe I have to tell you this. Like, you know, you can't do cardio and lift weights at the same time. And like take little breaks as you go to the weight room, row a dumbbell, get on the stair mill for 2 minutes. But it's pretty cool that, you know, you are, you know, 210 pounds and shredded right now, you know. It gets ridiculous. So we can't have that assumption that like these elite athletes, they must have it right. But I will say this about that level. With the pros, it's a lot easier because you just have to look at what their worst case class would look like. Like with Dirk, it was very straightforward. Based on his class and the anthropometrics usually seen there, it's like we're going to have quad monsters every year. And your quads by themselves, they look great. But next to these people with better attachments, not so much the case. So guess what we're doing this offseason? It's a lot of quads. So it's a little bit more straightforward, like what you're aiming for. With everyone else, it's a little bit different. And the goals usually start with like personal things that might help them like do better on stage. Like maybe this young lady wants glutathions for the first time ever. It's like, okay, maybe glutathions at this point aren't the only thing that, you know, this division requires, but that's a start. I think that's something that's very appropriate. And then by default, we're probably going to place better unless something crazy happens within the class, right? So I almost like the goal with like people who are not like Dark, for example, is to almost by themselves make them seem close to perfect so that, you know, their friends and their family, everyone's telling them they know it's BS because they're not informed. Oh, you're going to get first place. You're going to kill them. You know, blah, 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 all that stuff. It's more personal. And I think that's a privilege in itself because there's a lot less pressure because these are all things you're capable of. Whereas like with Dirk, we well know that, you know what, and that's the level of maturity that he's going to need to be his best. He already is, but like to be as good as he can be the next like decade or so is to understand that there is a chance that we might come up short on this. there might be a whole onslaught of like these quad monsters that come out of East Asia within the next like 7 years that like, holy crap, like there's something else. So you almost have to examine like the worst case scenarios and like be okay with that. Like I did a post a few years back about like aging out of this sport and how it's never a pleasant thing for an athlete. You know, like it's one day you just realize you're like, damn, I really I don't have it anymore. Uh like I've slipped and wow, I'm just realizing this now. Like I feel like even before you get to that point, like is you start your second season, your first season, you have to examine all the worst case things that can happen, despite you doing everything right, your coach doing everything that they knew was right at the time, and that happening. And I think kind of bracing yourself for that. It's almost like, you know, we tell our powerlifters to like, hey, you know, get some imaginary reps of that weight in between sets to prime yourself for what's going to happen. Same thing with the bodybuilding. I think it's not to be nihilistic either. It's just you have to rehearse those things because it's going to, should they happen at some point, it's going to happen to all of us. Like we'll get caught off guard with something that like how dirty bodybuilding did us acutely. Um, but if you practice that a little bit, it's crazy how much easier it is to absorb that. Like my first pro show, I got dead last, and I had rehearsed that so many times in my head. I'm like, I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get humbled. I just won every show in California that you could win, but what would that look like? Oh shoot, okay. And then it happened, and I was like, okay, but it didn't discourage me. Like if anything, I'm like, okay, like
It gave you more
there's
clarity.
just more work to do.
'Cause you,
I'm sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do everything right, you know, that sort of deal. So yeah, I guess trying to plan and prepare for everything doesn't necessarily make you immune to those things like not happening. Um, I think at best what they do is they just make it so that they're not career enders where they, in a very negative way, change the trajectory of your career. Like with Eric, I have no, like I felt bad because I checked up on you after the Washington show because I was like, is he okay? Is he okay? Is he doing good? And then like he hit me up. He's like, dude, I'm fine. I'm like, okay, that's right. Like it's not like fucking 2009 anymore. Like I know that if we look 10% better when you compete, but you got thrown in like a middleweight class that we're going to be talking about like in the next 10 years, and you place 12, I think you'd be able to very quickly be like, damn, like, wow. First of all, I'm part of bodybuilding history. I was up there, maybe won a few side shots. And yeah, wow, that was motivating and all my efforts were worth it, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I and I'm that's something I've only gotten the opportunity to work on lately. I think because I remember the conversation I had in my kitchen back in California with you when I was so frustrated that I was not able to get shredded in 2009, and I was hell bent on winning. And I'd won a couple classes, I'd gotten a couple overalls, and I was like, I'll do like, what do I need to do? I will kill myself, you know? And I was just so frustrated and angry. Um, and didn't know what to do and didn't know how to process the emotions. Of course, it was also the year my dad took his own life and there was a lot going on. So it wasn't just a lack of maturity as a bodybuilder. But yeah, I was so hell bent on a singular goal that I didn't really think like, yeah, Scott Kluth is not someone I can beat right now. You know, Luke Ellis and Jeff Albert are not guys I can beat right now. You know, Moji Alua and Jeff Alberts are not guys I can beat right now. You know, some of them, unless they really slip, aren't people I'm ever going to be able to beat. You know, maybe. But I think now I have the perspective of I'm going to do everything right in my power and I'm going to improve. And I don't know what I can accomplish, but I'm going to be damn sure I accomplish everything that's possible.
You're giving yourself the best opportunity to win. And for me, this is what sucks. Like I'm okay if I lose and I'm at 100%. Like I did everything I'm supposed to do. I'm fine because that just means someone's better than me. If I don't do everything I'm supposed to do, even if it's 1%, that's gonna kill me because I know that you're just gonna have the regret. Like if I would have done everything, what could have happened? Like my ding dong story, eating a box of ding dongs a week before a show and, losing out a place. I'm like, I probably would have moved up one spot because I would have been a little more conditioned. So it's like, then you got to sit on that for an entire off season. So it's as for me, it's like, if I just basically cross all my T's and dot my I's, and I'm not a perfect robot. It's not going to be like that 100% of the time. But if I'm like hitting 90% or above throughout the entirety of off season and prep, that's pretty good. It's given me a good opportunity to fulfill my own current potential, which is a huge win. It's also giving me an opportunity to beat you guys or someone else. And if you guys beat me, well, hey, that means you guys just are a little bit better and I can live with that. So I think it's important, like for me, like for some athletes, like you might assess everything and go, hey, you fulfilled your potential. We did everything we could. Everything we did according to the current research of science. We nailed that. You basically prepped super well. You were a good husband or wife the entire way through. Everything was perfect. It's just not your time yet. It's just we didn't do anything wrong at all. You just need more time doing the same things. Another year, 2, 3 years later, you're just going to see continued improvement. And then maybe it is your time because a lot of this sport is timing. Because you could show up on one stage, one weekend, get a first place, show up the next weekend, same physique, and get 10th. Because it's an entirely different lineup, different stage, like you're saying, Eric, different stage lighting, different venues, different judges, different perspectives. So it all comes down to doing what you need to do to improve yourself, fulfill your potential, and then the rest is kind of out of your control. It's kind of up to fate at that point, win or lose.
Yeah, those are the harder, like for me personally, I think that the tough ones are where it's really close. Like if I place 12th in middleweight, division of the gods, and like, it's like, yeah, like best case scenario, I'm 11th, all good. When I have been in lineups where it is, yeah, you were right there. I think that's challenging because I can't help but play over the things in my head. Like, what if it had gone my way, But I think that's where you kind of remind yourself, like, and it will one day. If you're being objective, like, and there are these things that you don't have control over, it's going to tip your way. Sometimes it's going to tip the other way. And I think the internal check I do with myself as an athlete is, okay, let's say you got robbed today. Let's think of a time you got a gift, because that is the way you assess. Are these random subjective things, because some people like some physique, some people like others, sometimes there's good lighting, sometimes there's bad lighting. If you're accurately and as objectively as possible gauging those things, you should have, as long as you've competed more than like twice, roughly an even number of times where you think it went your way and you're like, oh, that was lucky because I would have put myself one lower, to the number of times where you think, oh man, I would have put myself one higher. And that helps you let go of both. You don't over-celebrate the times where you had, like a judging lineup that really liked size or really liked conditioning, and you happen to be that person. And you also don't get salty or too salty about the times where it went the other way. Especially like if you were saying, Jeff, if you can look back and be like, well, I did everything I could, and that's just the sport. So I think that is another place with pro athletes where we can really help them as coaches to try to get that perspective.
2009, Eric, Washington, like the overall, I won by 1 point. Let's say there was 3 more judges added to the panel. It could have easily went the other way because 2 judges might say, hey, I like Luke Ellis better. I like his size better. Now, how am I going to base my off season on that lineup? Because so many different types of physiques in that lineup. So let's say if Luke Ellis won, am I going to say, okay, now I have to add 20 pounds of muscle?
Wouldn't hurt.
It wouldn't hurt, but is it realistic though? No.
Yeah.
It's not realistic. At the time I was 38 years old, 20 plus years of training, whatever. It's not realistic. I'm going to gain 20 pounds as a natural. So then it's like, okay, what can I do to give me the edge? It's not the size game. It's like, okay, let me refine what I have if there is any weak points in comparison to the lineup, so as far as like basing off of symmetry, let's say my back's a little bit thinner than the other guys, it's a little out of proportion with my own physique. Okay, now I know I got to improve my back. Maybe I got to play more the conditioning card. I need that extra detail to shine even more. So you kind of have to look at each lineup and differentiate that way, because it, like, especially with your class, Eric, at Worlds last in 23, there was a lot of different physiques up there. So if you're basing it solely off of like, I need to match up that person's back, or I need to match up to that person's bicep, that might not be exactly what you need to do. It might be part of the picture, but it could be some other areas that, as far as refining your own physique, that might give you the edge. Because again, this is a very subjective sport. I might like one physique, you might want something different, or like something similar, but hey, maybe you just favor conditioning over a little more size. So you have to look at all that. And I don't think you should put stock into just looking at just that particular lineup solely.
No, I totally agree. The funny thing is when I go back and I assess my physique in 23, since we're on that, I don't find myself looking at the lineup, like my pictures from stage. I look at the pictures that Brandon took of us on Sunday, where I was hitting those shots. And I also knew that you were there coaching me to look my best in each pose. And I just looked really good on Sunday. Or I guess it was Monday, because we competed on Sunday. Like we had been responsible with our eating the day prior and the breakfast. We had moved a lot. We had trained. And I had kind of basically retained that same level of fullness and crispness. And I had good lighting. Brandon was taking pictures. And you were coaching me right there. And I was like, okay, so this is the best I can look right now. Where are the flaws? And I was looking at that. And I look at that and I go, oh man, with my waist size, even though my quads are good, I could use more quad sweep. And those back shots are really good because my conditioning's there, but man, more like iliac and lumbar lats would really give me more, taper. And okay, I'm always going to be the 6 foot slightly narrow guy. So we could always get more, thoracic lats to see it from the front and medial delt. And, and then just get bigger overall. But I think when you get to the point where all you can say is, I just need to get bigger overall as a pro, you've done a pretty good job, because that's always going to be an issue, because there's people walking around like Babacar or Oscar, So, I found a lot more to be critical about and to have a more targeted focus looking at my own personal pictures, which seems weird in the sport of comparisons, than I did looking at those lineups. So I tend to agree.
How much stock do you guys put into the judges' feedback? I mean, I have my opinions of it. I'm happy to share, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
I think they're great at judging what's there on that day. They're actually, I think in my experience, like more on than not. They do it very efficiently. It's a lot of pressure to be a judge. It's a lot of pressure. People don't realize that.
It's like, I never want to be a judge because I heard it's really challenging and difficult. So
yeah. In even NPC, they do it quick. But you know what? They get it right. I'd say even a little better than like natural bodybuilding shows. Like they do a good job of sticking to the criteria. And these new classes, it just keep popping up every week. So I think they're good at that. But I think where it stops is when it comes to feedback. Like I almost wish my athletes would stop asking. Like, we know what took place today relative to like who was up there. But does it really help you? No. It's like, you probably have a better idea. Between you and I, we can come up with a good game plan in regards to like how we can do better from here. But I almost think those powwows with judges are, I hate saying it, but like a waste of time, because sometimes, again, they just place you relative to everyone who's over there. Like, they can't give you specific feedback in regards to like, they might not even remember you half the time if the show's big enough, because they were just trying to do their job that they were assigned to do, which is way different from being a bodybuilding consultant.
I got 2 comments here, and this is because I've had the recent pleasure in the last 3 years of doing a lot more judging. And I've judged on, I guess, 3 or 4 continents. So for the bodybuilding class, which is basically the same, whether it's enhanced, natural, federation to federation, you're going to see far less variation in it because it's the biggest, shredded, most symmetrical guy wins, and everyone's trying to weight that 30, 30, 30, or 33.3, 33.3, 33.3. And there are some thresholds. Like if your body fat's high enough that your waist is large, it messes up your symmetry. If your body fat's so high that it just doesn't look like you showed up for a bodybuilding show, it doesn't matter how big you are, right? And if you are shredded, but it doesn't look like you lift weights, then you're not going to be able to see some of the definition. So outside of those kind of like entry-level requirements for those three classes, like basic levels of symmetry, conditioning, and size, it's going to be the same across federations. And I think judges' feedback for a bodybuilding division is probably not going to be more helpful than good pictures and a consultation with an experienced coach. I will say, though, for people who compete across federations in divisions that don't have as clear criteria, and especially if they're competing internationally, where the interpretation of some of these rules does differ, judges' feedback, good judges' feedback can be really important. And the way to give good judges' feedback, if any judges are listening here, is to not focus on what the athlete should do to get the outcome you want, but just to give them the objective thing that you saw. I placed you this way relative to the others because here were the things. Don't turn it into, I'm going to coach you to what you need to change, because you may not know that you're right or not. You know, so you might be an amazing coach and also a judge. That's possible. I coach and I judge. So, you know, I have that opportunity to give that feedback, but I specifically don't. I stay in my lane. I give them the feedback that they're actually asking for is, why did I place the way I placed? And what would improve my placing? And I actually do take pictures of people on like up there, and I try to write feedback. It is very challenging to do that when you've got a 400-person show to do, though. I tell you what. So the extent that I can, I will do that. The main thing that I think most people make the mistake of doing is that they make assumptions across federations, across country lines, and across similar-ish divisions as to what the criteria are. So a really, really common thing that happens, which I think is quite unfortunate, is that if you take a bikini competitor who would probably place well at the highest level in the pros, and you take them to a low-level show in a federation that doesn't have career bikini criteria, I almost can guarantee you that they will place second or third. Because when you don't have clear judging criteria of exactly what it means to not be as hard as the figure division or the female bodybuilding division or fit body or physique, whatever it is in your federation, it gets immediately scaled to who else is on stage with you. And if you go to a local level show, there'll be okay bikini competitors. And there'll be someone who has a bit of quad separation, cap delts, and basic glute tie-ins. And then the gal who has fully separated quads, really cap delts, full glute tie-ins, and, you know, a nice V-taper, she's too hard. You should be in the physique class. No, she shouldn't. She might be able to win a world title, but she looks too hard for this class because your judging criteria is poorly written and it doesn't actually have pictures associated with it, right? So that happens all the time. And there's a version of that for men's physique. There's a version of that for classic. And if you're in one of these federations that has basically 8 different versions of classic and men's physique and 3 different things of bikini, this happens all the time. And there are some federations that are notoriously bad at this, and there are some regions that interpret these rules differently because they might be the international affiliate of a organization that started in the States, writes all the rules in English, and then not only will people play in telephone, but we're actually playing translation here, right? So I can tell you that I do think it's valuable to not only get judges' feedback, but to talk to judges before you get on stage, or to make sure that your coach does it. And if you work with a coach who only works with athletes, this is a really common one. I got this really well-known coach. Oh, they are primarily an NPC coach. And they got this, you know, oh yeah, sure, I'll help you out. You know, what's the difference? And you're going into a WBF show or NANBF or OCB or what have you. Make sure that coach actually knows the differences, because there are differences. So I think that is the one thing that this is where I would buck the party line of 3DMJ a little bit, where it's if you're talking about one of these divisions that has more subjective guidelines, in an already subjective sport that you can think is one way if you're used to competing in one federation or one country. Those you really want to look at ahead of time, contact the judges beforehand, ask them to clarify to you what the criteria are, DM them, and then and have that also be something that your coach is aware of. Because the way they tell you how to pose might even be wrong, because there are subtle differences there as to how the class is actually done, whether it's an eye walk or what have you.
It's a challenge though, too, because a lot of the federation's standards are different. And even within federation, it might say on a website or something, this is what the criteria is. And then you get a mixed lineup show up. And I'm sure it's hard for some judges just to say, okay, this person may be a little harder, but looks way better than this other person who's fitting the criteria. It's hard not to say, okay, well, I'm going to place that person second or last. Because you can see visually, like, this person obviously looks better, regardless of the criteria. And we've seen this all the time on the local level, especially. You see harder figure athletes or bikini athletes getting placed lower. They go to Worlds and they're placed higher because of the lineups, the way how lineups look and fit in with each other. So it's very it's a very subjective sport to begin with. So I don't know what the answers are. I just know as a coach, if I'm coaching an athlete, I'm going to base more so on what's going to have them look their best, their best package, a blend of symmetry, conditioning, muscularity, and again, knowing the art of bodybuilding. Like, you kind of know like what's excessive. Like, you're going to get, okay, I don't want my bikini athlete to have like shredded glutes and there's no more roundness to their glutes. But I do want to have their glutes look pretty tight, because I know if their glutes go soft, regardless of criteria, it's probably not going to look as good as some of the other girls that are up there. So personally, as a coach, it's like I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make that particular athlete, regardless of criteria, have them look their best on show day. And the way my perspective is, again, am I going to give full power to a panel of 7 judges, or I'm going to give the power to myself and let me guide what success is? I can respect the judges, I can respect the federation's criteria, but at the end of the day, if I fulfill my potential, I'm successful. If they want to give me a first place, I fit the criteria, great. If I'm this particular show, I'm 3rd or 4th because they say I'm too soft or too hard. Okay, maybe next time I'll take it more into consideration. Okay, maybe I can improve my physique to their standard as well as my standard. That's how I kind of see it personally.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the division, because, like, for example, wellness, like or bikini, like there's like very specific muscles that you do and don't want to develop. So it's like
probably going down a rabbit hole, because it's like if you start putting in more and more divisions, you're going to start blurring those lines even more so. And it gets very confusing for athletes and coaches alike. What is the standards? What's the criteria? Some people's genetics don't cater to certain divisions either. And an athlete might say, you know what, I want to be a bodybuilder, but they don't carry a ton of muscle. And that's where their heart is. Like, do I tell that person, like, don't do what your heart is saying, your passion is doing, because you fit this other division better? It's like, I'm going to do what I'm basically going to take care of my athlete first, and before I start putting my attention into federations.
Yep. I think ideally, the solution here is that the federations have publicly available PDF downloads that are updated annually with pictures and extremely clear criteria, not just this is a less hard division. What does that mean? Do you want to see quad separation? Do you want to see cross striations? Where? Show me pictures, because I think you're right. When we have unclear, overly broad, subjective criteria that are just bullet points on a PDF document, yeah, you're just going to kind of get the average. And then once we start to see athletes win, that becomes the look,
I think it almost, I mean, if this is, I was getting judged, but I almost like on a local level, it's like, here's this criteria. Okay, now we're getting into the world level. It's like, okay, it's a softer look, but it's okay for harder looking than what the local level looks like.
That shouldn't happen, though, in my opinion. That to me that's a problem. Because then how do you get the person to even win a pro card to then compete at the high level, you know?
I mean, you could make a case, okay, this person's only been training 3 years, this person's been training 10. First time competitor, 10 years of training is probably going to look harder than someone who's been training for a year or two. So, like I said, there's so much subjectivity, so many blurred lines here. I don't think it's an easy solution.
No, and it's
That's
probably
why
not a
for me,
solution
it's
at
like
the
I don't
athlete
get
or coach
into the
level.
debates too much. I'm like, okay, what is this particular athlete I'm working with? What do we need to make this person look their best regardless?
Yeah, I think especially with the women's divisions, like your best bet is just try to maximize everything if you're a natural athlete. There's just so much more customization when you're talking about enhanced athletes, like how a lot of these wellness girls train, like if natural athletes like knew, they'd be so shocked. It's like, no, they're really not really training their upper bodies. Like it's their upper back's a byproduct of RDLs and some help from other compounds, right? That are not compounds. And that's kind of it. They train their upper body once a month, maybe, you know? And you can do that with drugs. There's just more customization. I can decide with drugs if I want to compete at, I don't know, 190 versus like 230. Like I have that decision, whereas your best bet as a natural athlete is just try to maximize everything. Eventually we'll find a class that kind of suits you, your look, and we'll learn to pose. But at the end, you're going to get the most satisfaction. We've had this with a bunch of women we train that they're like, I really like my physique, even though it's not being rewarded in this class. I'm so interested in getting back to my off season, just continuously like maximizing this thing, which I think that message is very relevant to this whole podcast, because quite often that decision goes against what they were told, right? But they don't care. They just want to continue to find ways to get better. But yeah, for most women, because those are the bloodiest divisions, especially the newer ones, it's just maximize everything when in doubt. Train your upper back hard, sure, prioritize some areas, but that's for most people going to get them their best look at the end. Because even the top girls across all classes, that's the one thing, like, you're like, you can almost do any like division here and like do pretty well. We might just have to pull back on the dieting a little bit, but you would fit in everywhere. So
Totally agree. Yeah, it does come down to, we'll maximize everything. Maybe for certain classes, we'll diet 4 weeks less. And then when you're maximized, does your structure fit into certain classes better than other? And then, okay, well, do you like that class? Because if you don't want to put on heels, don't. You know, like it's and
yeah.
maybe you're going to love winning world title and you're like, whatever. If I got to put on heels to win a world title, I'm good with it. Then I will, you know. Actually, Paul Revelia, he's a good example of this because it's not a men's division. Longest time, and it was because the division didn't even exist, he was a bodybuilder. And he was a good bodybuilder. You know, he turned pro, NGA pro, did well. I think he did well in the IFPA. But dude 6'2", 6'3",
Mm-hmm.
and just has a kind of a pretty male model physique. And I know Paul, he likes to win. You know, he's competitive. He was a college baseball player, and he had some judges tell him, and just from his own experience, that you'd probably do pretty well in men's physique. Jumped in, dude is a top pro, you know? And I think a lot of it just had to do with kind of the height and the kind of level of lower body development you need to have at that height. So, you know, I remember, Berto, remember when we did the photo shoot with Brandon after I competed in the Hawaii show? I don't know if you remember, one of the judges said, you know,
Yeah.
if you were a men's physique competitor, I think you would already be a pro and doing very well. And I said, thank you very much. I'll take second, you know? So, yeah. And the thing is I could see myself doing versions of classic, so long as it's, and the criteria are coming out and being developed in the WNBF. Like, classic is basically bodybuilding with more focus on posing, slightly larger trunks. And if done right, I think I would enjoy it, because I love the posing aspect. I love the art, and, you know, I'm a historian. But I ain't putting on board shorts. That just ain't me, and it wouldn't make me happy. I honestly do not think I would be happy if you told me you were going to go win a world title and I don't think this is true, by the way, to be clear, as a men's physique competitor, and you will place 12th in the bodybuilding pro division. I would still do the bodybuilding pro division. And that's, you can tell, like, I think you just have to ask yourself those questions. Like, what do I care about? What do I like? how much is winning versus it. But if you told me, hey, you might win, like you place top 3 in the pro classic division and or 12th in bodybuilding, I'd be like, I might cross over, like, so I think you have to figure out what's the balance of those
100%.
things.
I agree.
With that said, I guess it ties into everything where, at the end, we use a sport to get the most out of us, but it's like body art. It's like tattoos. Like that's why I tell people when they inquire about me not having tattoos. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've tattooed my body. It's just very different, and it gets pretty weird too. Like it's pretty niche. You like what you like, right? So, yeah, this is at the end a way for me to express myself. Like, and I really, I only compete to get the most out of myself. Like that's literally the only reason. And I just, not that everyone should view it that way, but it's a perspective that I think more people should consider. Like that's what comes first. And I think that's what, you would do. Yeah, you would be a better men's physique guy, like overnight, especially that year. But sorry, right? That's just not going to get the most out of you, right? Not the way you want.
No. If you told me I'd be covering up my legs, I would be like, why am I here? Like I just don't get it. So yeah, 100%. So we've covered a lot. I think we provided a lot of helpful perspective. But I want to bring it back. Is there anything that you two gentlemen feel we do cover, or you do like to cover, or you do think is important, or that comes up in that post, season recap, that is something that you guys have, that we haven't talked about yet?
Not that we haven't talked about. I'm just going to reiterate, just allow yourself some time to process, reflect, gain clarity, and just make sure you're doing something moving ahead that's productive and you're enjoying it. That's the main thing.
Same as Jeff, give yourself some time to just take it all in, because it's a lot, especially at first. It's a lot. And yeah, and from there, like those are going to be your, again, it could be a great time to make decisions like post show, or if you don't understand just how volatile of a time it can be as well, it could also send you like down the wrong path. I've seen this in many ways. Like my enhanced guys, my friends, like they're like, I'm gonna get bigger, for example. I'm like, bro, you do not need to get bigger. Like you are like 5'5", 230. Like maybe chill and think about this. Talk with your wife. Like for me, that's a big thing I do postseason, especially those like close to me that have to deal with me. It's like, what can I do better? Because otherwise, I'm now gonna be a jerk with like more energy. That's gonna be magnified 10 times. So, yeah. It's a wonderful sport because it lets you really reflect on like who you are, what you can do better, and honestly, like it's like the bodybuilding thing is not just limited to your physique. I know that's something that you mentioned many times, Eric, about how the word in Spanish, right? It's physical culture, physical culturista. Like it should go beyond that. And nothing like a contest prep will like show you like who you really are, like what is working, what is not working. And this has nothing to do with the stage. So complicated topic, guys, but I think we did a pretty good job.
You guys knocked it out of the park. I think it's great for people to reflect on this stuff. And I hope that not only will you think ahead in the future, if you're listening, to how will you define success? And does that match your values? And does it empower you? Or does it put the power in the hands of others to make the best of yourself? And then do you give yourself that time to reflect on how things went? And then can you look back on those values you set forth and what you told yourself and see, are my actions and my feelings aligned with that? And if not, how do I better align them? And then also giving you that time, space, and recovery, mentally, emotionally, and physically, so that you can make the most of the off season and start working on turning as many of those stones over as possible. So big thank you to both you, Jeff, and you, Alberto, for your insights and your wisdom, both as athletes and coaches. I know I've learned from it. And dear listener, I hope you have as well. And we'll catch you next time on the 3DMJ podcast. What's going on, everybody? Eric Helms here, Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and let me just take 1 second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I do with Lauren Colenso-Semple, Eric Trexler, as well as Mike Zerdos. These are experts in their field, and we cover all the information relevant to you as an athlete or coach if you're working with strength or physique athletes, or if you're a recreational or competitive athlete yourself. We cover nutrition, training, sports psychology, and health. And we do this in written format, as well as, since you like the podcast, audio summaries, as well as video concept reviews. If you're a trainer, we also have continuing education credits for ACSM, NSCA, NASM, and ACE. So head over to 3dmusclejourney.com, click on the products tab, and you can find us there. I look forward to seeing you, and enjoy the podcast.